The day begins with a heavy drizzle, which gradually turns into a steady downpour as the hours pass. The rails of Sodor are covered in a slippery sheen of water, and everything is damp and muddy. Several of the engines grumble amongst themselves, clearly not enjoying the rain. Thomas and James are both particularly put out, as they are both vain about their appearances. Thomas, I can't believe it's raining. My paint is going to get all streaky, James. This is just typical. The rain is going to ruin my nice, shiny finish, pouts as he huffs along the tracks. Thomas sighs, reluctantly conceding, I suppose you're right. The island does need the rain, even if it is inconvenient for us right now. Hopefully it'll stop soon. James, on the other hand, is still grumbling and pouting. James, I just know this rain is going to spoil my finish. Just you wait, I'll be a right mess by the end of the day. Thomas and James both gasp in mock offence, steam puffing indignantly from their funnels. James, what did you just call us? His paint steams slightly despite the rain. Oi! We are not Bab. Are you actually going to work in this weather? Meanwhile, Edward watches Nazo roll off with a proud smile. Now that's an engine who understands responsibility, he mutters before turning back to his own shunting duties. The two sulking mixed-traffic engines glare at each other as the rain pours harder. Sir Topham Hatt arrives at the shunting yard, clearly impressed. He glances around, noting that the majority of the engines are hiding under the sheds, avoiding the rain. Sir Topham Hatt. Ah, Edward, Nazo, I see you're the only two being useful this morning. Well done, Edward puffs proudly, pleased to be acknowledged. James and Thomas peer out of their sheds, trying to avoid the rain and looking rather disgruntled by the recognition of Edward and Nazo. Sir Topham Hatt nods heartily, appreciating Nazo's hard-working attitude. Sir Topham Hatt, yes indeed. It's good to see another engine on Sodor who understands the importance of hard work and responsibility. Edward nods in agreement as the Fat Controller turns to look at the two sulking engines Sir Topham Hatt. You could learn a thing or two from him, James and Thomas. Hiding from the rain like a couple of children. James and Thomas both grumble defensively. James, we're not hiding. We're just sheltering from the rain, Thomas. Yes, perfectly reasonable given the weather conditions. Edward and Nazo share an amused glance, both knowing that James and Thomas are just making excuses for their laziness. Sir Topham Hatt raises an eyebrow, unimpressed by their excuses. Sir Topham Hatt, sheltering? Sheltering? James, you're practically sitting in a puddle. Thomas, your wheels are still visible from the siding. You were as subtle as Henry on a diet. James and Thomas flush beneath their soot, or rather James' freshly streaked paint. James, excuse me, I was merely Thomas. We'll be out in 5 minutes. Lies poorly, a loud drip, drip. A lot of rainwater from James's funnel lands between his wheels. Edward muffles a snort. Sir Topham Hatt sighs in disappointment, shaking his head at the two stubborn engines. He turns back to Nazo. Sir Topham Hatt, well, at least you have your priorities straight, Nazo. Unlike some engines I could mention, looks pointedly at James and Thomas. Nazo smiles, happy to have won Sir Topham Hatt's approval. Meanwhile, James and Thomas grumble amongst themselves, the sound of the rain getting louder and louder on their rooftops. Sir Topham Hatt nods, appreciating Nazo's positive attitude. Sir Topham Hatt, you're quite right, Nazo. It's important to stay positive and keep working even in unpleasant weather. A little rain shouldn't stop an engine from doing their duties. Edward watches approvingly as Thomas and James sulk miserably beneath the shed. The Fat Controller chuckles gently at their childish behavior, impressed by Nazo's work ethic. Sir Topham Hatt glances at the sky, noting the heavy downpour and the clouds above. He nods thoughtfully. Sir Topham Hatt. I think your driver might be right. It looks like the rain will be letting up soon. James and Thomas both visibly perk up, their hopes rising. Edward chuckles softly again, knowing their patience is being tested. Sir Topham Hatt laughs, agreeing heartily. Sir Topham Hatt, yes, indeed. James and Thomas have been slacking off all morning, while you and Edward have been hard at work. They'll have a lot to make up for once the rain lets up. Edward snickers at the thought of James and Thomas having to work twice as hard later. Thomas and James grumble from inside the shed, already dreading the extra work. Just as Sir Topham Hatt predicted, the rain starts to lighten and the storm clouds start to disperse within the next hour or so. Sir Topham Hatt. Seems like the rain is clearing up at last. Good on your driver for predicting that, Nazo. James and Thomas can be heard sighing from within the shed, realizing they can no longer use the weather as an excuse. Edward lets out a satisfied chuckle, amused by their misfortune. Edward smiles, nodding. Edward, yes, you're right, we've got plenty to do. Let's get started. Edward starts to puff out of the yard, Nazo following right behind. Thomas and James emerge from the shed, looking utterly miserable as they glare after the two engines. James. Oof. We didn't want to be out in that terrible weather anyway. Yeah. We were just, resting our boilers. James face palms. Edward and Nazo share an exasperated look at the two engines' excuses, trying to hold back laughter. Edward, of course, just resting your boilers. That's a new one. Nazo, more like resting your laziness if you ask me. Sir Topham Hatt approaches Edward and Nazo, looking pleased with their hard work. Sir Topham Hatt, excellent work, you two. You've really been keeping the island's transport running smoothly despite the rain. He turns to James and Thomas, who are still sulking nearby. Sir Topham Hatt, James and Thomas, since you two did much work during the rain, I've got a little task for you. James huffs, looking irritated. Oh, really? What is it this time? Really would have actioned it for you, I suppose. Sir Topham Hatt, since you were so busy resting your boilers earlier, you can have the privilege of cleaning up the shunting yard. Thomas groans in annoyance, while James looks downright offended. James, what? You want us to do manual labour while Edward and Nazo get to pull the fancy express? Sir Topham Hatt chuckles at James's indignation, knowing that their laziness earned them this punishment. Sir Topham Hatt, yes, James. I want you two to clean up the shunting yard. And since Edward and Nazo have been working hard all morning, they'll be pulling the express today. They've earned it. James and Thomas grumble unhappily, not pleased with the turn of events. Edward smirks in satisfaction, enjoying the look on James and Thomas's faces as they grumble about their punishment. Nazo also looks pleased, having earned the privilege of pulling the express. James, this is ridiculous. Why should Edward and Nazo get to pull the express just because they worked harder than us? Thomas, yeah, it's not fair. We could pull the express just as well, if not better. Edward thinks for a moment. Edward, why don't you take the express this time? I don't mind pulling Annie and Clarabel. He looks at James and Thomas, both of whom are still grumbling and sulking. Edward, besides, it's only right that you get the chance to show off a bit in front of our lazy friends. They could certainly learn a thing or two about hard work. Edward chuckles gently, appreciating Nazo's warning. Edward, don't worry, I'll be careful. I've done this many times before. You focus on having a good run with the express, all right? Edward nods, then puffs over to his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle already attached. He gives Nazo a friendly nudge as he passes. Edward, safe travels, mate. Try not to let James's temper get in the way of your run. He hates when other engines pull express trains better than him. Thomas and James watch from the yard, grumbling but unable to argue with Sir Topham Hatt's decision. Nazo's now free to enjoy a smooth ride on Gordon's Hill. No complaints here. Edward and Nazo finally finish up their work, both looking tired but satisfied. The sun is starting to set on the horizon, and the sky's a beautiful mix of oranges and purples. Edward, well, that was quite a day, wasn't it? I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty exhausted. Edward chuckles as he puffs into the shed, agreeing with Nazo. Edward, you're right about that. James and Thomas will be working through the night just to clean up the area. Serves them right for being so lazy all day. I'll be surprised if they get any rest at all tonight. Edward and Nazo exchange a tired but satisfied glance as they settle into the shed, their work finally done for the day. The distant grumbles of James and Thomas can still be heard from outside, clearly struggling with their cleaning duties. Edward, honestly, if they'd just done their jobs earlier like proper engines, this wouldn't have happened. A loud clang echoes from outside, likely Thomas dropping a shovel in frustration. Edward shakes his head, chuckling to himself. Edward, at this rate, those two may be working all night long. Not that they don't deserve a little extra work today. Another loud clang can be heard outside, followed by James and Thomas both cursing under the breaths. Edward just shakes his head again. Those two are in for a long night, I suspect. Edward's eyes widen as Nazo mentions the upcoming rain. Edward, wait, did you say it's supposed to rain again? And the shunting yard is close to the shed. Oh, this is just perfect. Poor James and Thomas are definitely in for it now. A distant groan can be heard from outside, followed by some particularly angry mutterings from James. Edward snickers softly. 100 years since. Edward nods, remembering the weather predictions. Edward, no, you're right, Nazo. It's likely to rain again later tonight. And if it does, well, James and Thomas will be stuck right smack in the middle. I almost feel sorry for them. Another loud clang can be heard outside, along with some particularly annoyed grumbles from the two complaining engines. Edward can't help but smirk. Edward hears the first drip-drop from the rain outside, and a big smirk appears on his face. He turns to Nazo. Sounds like you were spot on. The rain is here. Meanwhile, outside the shed, James and Thomas can be heard groaning in despair as they realize what's happening. Edward listens to the muffled grumbles and thuds of James and Thomas struggling outside, his smirk growing wider. The rain starts pouring harder, now a full patter-plash against the shed roof. James yelling over thunder, "This is torture! Who even planned this?" A bucket clatters in the distance. Thomas dripping wet. "I swear Edward is laughing in there." Edward turns to Nazo, eyes twinkling. "Want me to accidentally roll out my side buffer support?" Edward's smirk turns into a full, steamy chuckle as Nazo hints at the perfect opportunity. Edward whispering dramatically, "Oh ho! You want me to accidentally let my buffers swing toward them? A little bump, just enough to make James slip in a puddle?" Outside, James yelps as rain drips down his funnel. "I can hear you plotting in there!" Nazo's laugh mixes with Edward's muffled wheezes. The universe rewards chaos. Edward watches through a crack in the shed door as James's once pristine red paint starts streaking off under the downpour, his soot now dripping like wet grime. Thomas is too busy wrestling with a leaking bucket to even comment. "James, my paint! Who authorized this rain?" He slips on a slick patch of mud, sending his wheels spinning wildly. Nazo and Edward share glances, then erupt into muffled snorts. The universe hands them comedy on silver platters. Edward, now vibrating with suppressed laughter, presses a buffer against the shed wall to peek at James. who is now sprawled in a muddy puddle, his paint smeared beyond recognition. James wailing, "I'm a ruined engine, look at me! Look at what you've done!" He flails an accusing smokestack toward Edward's shed. Nazo and Edward clutch each other for balance as their muffled giggles shake the whole shed. Thomas faceplants into his bucket. This island is cursed. Edward and Nazo finally burst into uncontrollable laughter as they witness James, now a mud-caked, paintless, smokeless shadow of his former self, flop onto the tracks like a soggy rag doll. Thomas isn't faring better. His blue livery is gone, replaced by streaks of brown sludge. James muffled, "I hate the weather. I hate rain, droughts. I even hate Annie and Clarabelle now." The coaches, still attached to him via sheer misfortune, drip ominously. Nazo wheezes so hard he snorts steam out his funnel. Edward wipes tears from his eyelights. This is art. The rain finally ceases, leaving James and Thomas looking like two mud-slathered, paintless train wrecks in the middle of a waterlogged shunting yard. The sudden silence is almost deafening, save for James' occasional sniffle. James whispering, "I can see my bare boiler." Thomas lifts his head from a puddle, blinking at the sky as if questioning reality itself. Am I still blue?" Nazo and Edward exchange glances, then slowly roll out of the shed to witness their masterpiece up close. James and Thomas both freeze, their eyelights widening in horrified realization. James lifts a mud-caked buffer to inspect his side, now just a streaky, rust-coloured ghost of his former self. "I'm grey! I'm a rusty tin can." Thomas frantically rubs at his faceplate with a rag. The cloth comes back black. Nazo, what did you do to my livery?" Nazo and Edward stand there, innocent as fresh paint jobs. We were asleep. Must have been the rain's fault." Sir Topham Hatt arrives on the scene, taking in the mud-covered paintless disasters that are James and Thomas. His eyebrows shoot up, then promptly collapse into a frown. Sir Topham Hatt, goodness me, what in Sodor's name happened to you too? James and Thomas exchange panicked looks before pointing at each other. It was his fault first. Nazo and Edward stand behind Sir Topham Hatt, trying and failing to look solemn. A single steamy snort betrays them. Sir Topham Hatt sighs deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose as he surveys the muddy, paintless wreckage that was once James and Thomas. Sir Topham Hatt, lost your paint in a rainstorm? That's not possible unless you two rode through a coal yard first. James opens his mouth to protest, then shuts it when Sir Topham Hatt raises a finger. Don't even try. Nazo and Edward exchange glances again. This time they can't suppress their giggles anymore. Sir Topham Hatt glares at the mud-coated, paintless engines with an air of utter disbelief. Sir Topham Hatt, I've seen some sorry sights in my day, but you two are the sorriest. Covered in mud and rust and not a lick of paint. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? James and Thomas wince. Nazo and Edward shake silently with suppressed laughter behind the Fat Controller. We're sorry, sir. Sir Topham Hatt nods gravely, rubbing his chin as he eyes James and Thomas, now resembling abandoned scrap engines. Sir Topham Hatt, a new coat of paint, you say? Not the kind that runs off in a storm. James opens his mouth to argue, then shuts it when Sir Topham Hatt raises a finger. Don't even think about blaming the rain again. Nazo nudges Edward, whispering, they're getting permanent livery now. Sir Topham Hatt considers this, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. James and Thomas look at each other, then sigh deeply. James. Great, now we'll have permanent paint too, just our luck. Thomas nods dejectedly. We'll look like tractor engines now. Nazo and Edward snicker quietly, trying not to be too obvious. They are utterly enjoying the misery of the two paintless engines. Sir Topham Hatt nods in agreement, crossing his arms and glaring at James and Thomas, now resembling rust-slathered relics rather than handsome engines. Sir Topham Hatt, quite right. If you two hadn't been so lazy, you wouldn't need new paint in the first place. James and Thomas shift nervously, knowing they deserve the shame. Nazo and Edward are barely suppressing their giggles at this point. Sir Topham Hatt nods, patting his pocket watch. It's already late, and night has fully fallen over the island. Sir Topham Hatt, I suppose it's getting late, but before you three get some rest, I have a couple requests. James and Thomas look up, clearly dreading whatever's coming next. Nazo and Edward share a sly glance. Sir Topham Hatt adjusts his cap as he prepares a particularly delicate announcement. Sir Topham Hatt, first, let's get the obvious out on the table. Given that you two are still covered in mud and rust from your little rainstorm fiasco, James and Thomas look down in shame. Nazo and Edward smile slyly. They know what's coming next. Sir Topham Hatt, neither of you will be doing any work until you've learned your lesson, until you're back in tip-top condition. James and Thomas groan in disappointment, clearly unhappy with this ruling. Nazo and Edward snort at the grumpy engines. These penalties are just starting, Sir Topham Hatt, which leads me to my second request. James and Thomas perk up, realizing there's more to come. Nazo and Edward smirk, amused at how the engine's hopes keep getting crushed. Sir Topham Hatt, since you two are out of service for the time being, you'll be taking on a different role. James and Thomas exchange a look, clearly skeptical of their new role already. Nazo and Edward grin, knowing it's going to be an unusual one indeed, Sir Topham Hatt. You see, I have a little job for the both of you, one that you two will be very familiar with. James and Thomas look at each other, and suddenly they realize where this is going. As if on cue, Sir Topham Hatt smiles, and James and Thomas feel their hearts drop. Oh no, not Thomas. But I'm not ready. Nazo and Edward burst into steam-filled cackles, having anticipated this exact moment. The fat controller raises an eyebrow. Sir Topham Hatt, oh, you're quite ready, Thomas. Both of you are. You see from Sumchaust. James and Thomas groan and whimper in unison as the reality of their impending duty sets in. Nazo and Edward watch, trying and failing to contain their absolute glee. James, this is the worst. Why us? Thomas mumbling miserably, I knew the rain would ruin everything. We're never getting paint now. Sir Topham Hatt chuckles. Enjoying the miserable spectacle, he turns to Nazo and Edward, still grinning. Sir Topham Hatt, well, how do you like the new assignment? Sir Topham Hatt nods in approval, pleased with Nazo's reaction. He then turns to the sulking engines, who are still grumbling about their fate. Sir Topham Hatt, well, are you two going to say something? Or are you still pouting? James groans while Thomas looks utterly defeated. Nazo and Edward both grin. This is better than any play they've ever been in. James mutters under his breath, defeated. This is the worst day ever. Sir Topham Hatt claps his hands together, finalizing the sentence with a crisp nod. Sir Topham Hatt, excellent. Now, James, Thomas, report to the paint shed at dawn. And if I see even a speck of mud on you by then, the engines shrink under his gaze, you'll be scrubbing buffer beams for a week. Nazo and Edward exchange one last glance, then shuffle toward their beds, smugly humming train tunes as James and Thomas trudge off in defeated silence. As soon as Nazo and Edward settle into their beds for the night, they can hear James and Thomas still moping, complaining and grumbling all the way from the paint shed. James, groaning through the night, "This is the worst, the worst." Thomas, muttering unhappily, "I hate paint, I just want my old paint back." Nazo and Edward snicker as the complaining continues well into the night. This punishment was worth it for the entertainment alone. Edward chuckles, already picturing the scene. Gordon scoffing from his shed. "Honestly, those two idiots getting caught in a storm like inexperienced branch liners." Pathetic, Duck cackles muffled by her blanket. "Serves them right for skipping work earlier." Nazo mimics Oliver's nervous stammer. "Well, at least they won't be slipping on wet rails anymore." A distant thud suggests James just threw a shovel in rage. Edward's eyes light up as he considers the chaos to come. Duck already cackling from her shed. "Oh, James, did you finally get your livery washed off? I always thought that red looked a bit extra on you." Gordon snorts so hard his whistle creaks. "You two are now officially Sodor's ugliest engines." "Congratulations," Nazo mimics Oliver nervously. "Maybe it's a new fashion trend?" A distant clang, likely James kicking something in despair. Edward and Nazo grin widely, relishing in the mental image of the chaos about to come. Gordon, still scoffing. Fashionable paint, now I've heard it all. You should have seen yourself, James. A rust-slathered wreck is what you looked like. Duck snorts with laughter, muffled beneath her blanket again. James, sulking in his shed. A distant bang suggests Thomas just smacked his boiler out of frustration. Edward and Nazo just giggle at the mental picture of the engine's misery. Gordon, still mocking as he settles in for the night, just a bunch of rusty, paintless engines trying and failing to look nice again. I must say it's quite satisfying to see you two in such a pathetic state. Duck can barely stop herself from cackling out loud, shaking with suppressed laughter instead. Thomas, slinking off into his shed. Just you wait, we'll look fine after our new coats. Edward and Nazo burst into steamy laughter, nearly waking the entire yard as James and Thomas's groans echo in protest. Gordon, suddenly standing at attention, eyelights wide. Excuse me, did you just... Duck rolls out of her shed, wheezing. Oh ho ho ho! Now it's a war. Nazo grins smugly as Edward puffs his chest out with pride. That's right. I'm the king, James. Tarns. Bow to your new ruler. A bucket flies from James's shed in retaliation. Edward and Nazo exchange a triumphant glance, their smugness reaching legendary levels. The entire yard is now in an uproar. Gordon looks ready to explode, Duck is rolling on the ground laughing, and even Percy has woken up from his nap to witness the drama. James, screaming from his shed, still the best engine on Sodor. Even if I have to be painted pink. Thomas kicks open his door. Wait, no, not pink. Anything but that. Nazo leans toward Edward. Do you think Sir Topham Hatt will actually do it? Edward nods at Nazo's gossip. Edwin, the lady of the house is interested in a pink train, eh? Then I suppose she could probably talk Sir Topham Hatt into that pink. James is not impossible. James groans again. Thomas joins in. Please don't let him have a new paint job. I'll do anything. Edward's eye lights widen in horror as the implications sink in. James, screeching from his shed, brown? As in coal dust brown, I'd rather be paintless for a year. Thomas, now pale beneath his soot. Wait, black, like a furnace? Nazo and Edward clutch each other, shaking with suppressed laughter. Duck is practically hyperventilating. This is better than the time Percy got stuck in wet cement. Edward's eyelights bulge. Edward, wait. Wait, are you serious? They're seriously considering a black paint job. And a brown one too. James would have a heart attack. James moans behind the walls again. Oh, no, I can't. That's too dark. Please don't pick that one. Thomas, his face paler than ever, nods feverishly. Thomas, anything but that would be horrible. Edward and Nazo are both breathing heavily, still holding each other and shaking as they struggle to contain their laughter. The mere thought of James in brown or black paint, or even pink, has them in hysterics. Edward wheezing for air. I don't know what's funnier, James the pink engine or the sullen brown one. Nazo manages to gasp out a strained response. Still shaking with stifled giggles. Nazo, still gods, what a day. Edward and Nazo finally settle back into their beds, still giggling at the thought of James' impending liveried fate. Outside, a distant clang suggests Thomas just tripped over his own buffers in despair. Nazo, I can't wait to see which colour they pick. Edward mimics James's voice dramatically. Why is it always me? They both burst into muffled laughter as sleep finally claims them, dreams filled with pink, brown, or worst of all, black trains.